And now I would like to introduce today's special guest. Traditionally, if Canada wanted to talk with its hemispheric neighbors in Central and South America, it meant looking over the shoulder of and playing second fiddle to the United States. That has changed. The days are past when a powerful ally to the South could consider the Americas, from Mexico to Chile, its personal backyard. There is also the perception that the United States has ignored relations with hemispheric neighbors in the aftermath of 9/11. And while President Bush did tour Central and South America last month in an attempt to strengthen ties, he was dogged by protesters everywhere he went. Prime Minister Harper will be making a southern tour this summer, and he has good reason to expect an undoubtedly warmer reception. In a recent Canadian Club address, he said that our neighborhood doesn't end at the 49th parallel, and neither do our interests. Our new federal government recognizes a unique opportunity for Canada. And with the slowing of worldwide multilateral trade talks, strengthening regional ties is of strategic importance. Canada has long enjoyed strong ties to South America, ties based not only on trade and security, but on culture and immigration. Toronto's cultural scene, as an example, has long been enlivened by its Latin American and Brazilian citizens. And many of Canada's southern neighbors see an alternative model of democracy to that in the US. With social equity and inclusion as cornerstones of Canada's political and cultural development, many of these neighbors see us as increasingly attractive political and economic partners. And looking at recent results for Scotiabank, our sponsor of today's lunch, it's clear that partnerships in this region can be a very good thing indeed. Scotiabank has long had a strong presence in Central and South America. And in 2005, Latin Finance magazine recognized this commitment, awarding Scotiabank the honor of Bank of the Year. In a recent op-ed piece, Scotiabank CEO Rick Waugh, who I'm pleased is here with us today, said, and I quote, "The real growth opportunities for companies in North and South America, including small and medium-sized businesses, are in the Americas." I'm confident that Peter MacKay agrees with that assessment, and as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. MacKay represents a government determined to exploit emerging opportunities in the American region. Minister MacKay also recognizes that Canadian interests in the hemisphere extend beyond trade and balance sheets. In a recent address to the Organization of American States, he stressed that Canadian interests include the significance that Canada attaches to being part of a community of states committed to working together to ensure the freedom, security, and prosperity of our peoples. Minister MacKay has visited the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Brazil in the past year in order to stress this commitment. His counterparts there know that this government considers Canadian engagement on trade treaties, security, and sustainable development with Central and South America a top priority. He joins us here today to discuss this exciting new direction for Canada's foreign policy, a re-engagement with our continental partners. Please join me in welcoming the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, the Honourable Peter MacKay.
Well, thank you very much, Noella, for that very astute opening. You've really set the table for my remarks here. And Your Excellencies, distinguished head table guests, colleagues, I see David Sweet is here, and good friends John Capobianco, Peter Kent, and many familiar faces. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to address you on this very timely issue, and also to share a moment in speaking with Rick Waugh. And Rick is, I think, well on his way to a diplomatic posting, given the work that he's been doing abroad. C'est un honneur pour moi d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui, and I want to thank, of course, the Canadian Club for the invitation to be with you, to speak to you at this estimable organization. The Canadian Club has, for so many years, provided the space for much-needed discussion on matters of critical importance to all Canadians. Many of you would have heard the sad news this morning from Afghanistan, and I do want to start on a somber note. A Canadian soldier was killed by an IED attack, and I want to echo the condolences expressed by our Prime Minister to the family and loved ones of this brave soldier who was working to bring about peace and security in that troubled country. We lost a very fine Canadian today, and our hearts do go out to the family and friends of this brave soldier. In working to bring peace and freedom to the people of Afghanistan, this young man has made the ultimate sacrifice, and there is no other way to bring comfort to those who are grieving today except to say that this soldier was involved in something that is truly worthwhile and just. Now, I want to begin my remarks by acknowledging, as others have, that in the past 18 months you've heard from the Prime Minister of Canada. You've heard from my colleague and my friend, Canada's Minister of Finance, Jim Flaherty. You've lunched with the Premier of the Northwest Territories and others. You've taken briefings from Asia and China, and I'm glad to know as well that in this past January you heard from our ambassador in Washington, His Excellency Michael Wilson, a man very familiar to many of you, about the important work that he is doing in the United States of America on behalf of our country. So it's in that esteemed company that I'm pleased to speak to you today about Canada's new approach to foreign affairs, and to get beyond some of the rhetoric and the political wrangling, and to focus on what we can do constructively, and what we are doing to build security and prosperity and peace in the hemisphere, and, of course, set an example for the rest of the world. Canada counts. Our international efforts to strengthen opportunities for freedom, build basic democratic institutions, and to fight for the rule of law represent the very best of who we are and what we believe. And as I was speaking with Rick, I was reminded what an enormous well of goodwill there is for Canada throughout the world. Canada is an important defender of freedom and democracy, of human rights and the rule of law around the world. Next year, I'm proud to note that it is the 250th anniversary of representative democracy in my home province of Nova Scotia, where democracy then spread quickly across our country and became the underlying foundation of our nation. And it is in this historic context, and noting the long abiding history of this country's most storied club, that I wish to discuss with you Canada in the Americas. This subject has, I am told, been an infrequent topic for Canada Club's attention. And I propose that has to change, and it has to change quickly in the financial heartland of our country. To illustrate this point, if I'm not mistaken, and Noella, I'm sure you're a historian in the club as well, the last time that you, or perhaps your great-grandfathers, heard of the subject of Argentina or Panama or Colombia, for example, was November 1917. The last time Canada's Trade Commissioner to South America spoke to this Canadian club was October 28th, 1929, an inauspicious month in the world economy at the heartbreak of the Great Depression. And to suggest that you very soon will be, of course, obliged to take much more time and attention on the subject of the matter being the Americas. Under Prime Minister Harper's leadership, our government has articulated a focused foreign policy that advances core Canadian interests with vigor and innovative approaches in an environment of increasing complexity and demand. It requires adroit and thoughtful responses and forward-looking plans. This government recognizes that our foreign policy must promote Canadian interests, interests of prosperity and security, as well as core Canadian values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And I know you'll agree with me that Canada must be reckoned with as a member of the G8 and one of the world's most robust economies. Nous possédons un immense territoire qui abonde en ressources naturelles. Nos citoyens ne résignent pas devant le travail. Nous avons le sens de la justice. Nous avons très facilement accès à des capitaux et nous en mettons à disposition. Nous n'avons pas peur des risques et je dois ajouter que sur l'actuel gouvernement. Nous sommes en outre fermement attachés à nos principes en matière de politique étrangère. We are a successful democracy, a shining example of what freedom from want and freedom from fear can bring. We should be proud to be recognized as a powerful voice for human rights in the world, As a former Crown attorney in my home province, I can tell you, without exception, without equivocation, Canada is one of the world's biggest proponents and practitioners of the rule of law. In short, we have a lot to offer the world. Countries are looking to us to assist their efforts to build and strengthen justice systems. Countries like Ukraine, Georgia, China, and Russia, and of course Haiti and Afghanistan. And I recognize, as does the Prime Minister, that Canada's foreign policy cannot be effective at shaping the kind of world we want to live in, work in, and raise our families in if we are spread thinly or meekly across dozens of countries and sectors. Our new foreign policy objectives recognize the importance of focusing on our national interests in Canada, in our hemisphere, here in the Americas. And because of our long history of friendship and cooperation with the United States of America, and our position in the great North American partnership of the United States and Mexico, some might think that Canada's interests end here. And again, to paraphrase the Prime Minister, it goes well beyond the border. I can assure you, our interests do not end there. Prime Minister Harper has made it very clear that Canada's interests and strategic vision reach well beyond. And he said that Canada wants to re-engage throughout the Americas, and of course with our partners in Mexico. I have recently been meeting with our friends across the Caribbean and our neighbors in Central America, and our contacts, new and old, in South America, most recently with Brazil. In fact, Prime Minister Harper has asked that I focus on the Americas to establish it as a Canadian priority, and I am doing just that, working with partners in the region to support movements of democracy and strengthen the ability of democratic leaders to govern in the interests of their people. I'm working with colleagues in Cabinet and counterparts throughout the hemisphere to create opportunities for Canadian companies to invest in stable and prosperous economies and benefit from freer trade in the hemisphere. Also focusing on security. Transborder crime is of great concern in our country, as in others. And to achieve this, Canada needs strong bilateral partnerships, partnerships that are strong and vibrant and based on multilateral institutions. I'll be traveling to the Organization of American States in 2 weeks to attend the annual General Assembly. The theme for this year's General Assembly in Panama is sustainable energy, which encompasses, of course, environmental concerns shared here in Canada. I attended this meeting last year, and I can tell you from that experience, Canada is not only a valued partner as a principal player in the Americas, but we are looked to for partnership and support. And we must continue these efforts to foster and nurture a positive influence there. We will work through the OAS and through the United Nations to ensure that the multilateral institutions better reflect the needs and concerns of our hemisphere. And these initiatives and more, Canada is becoming a leader in the Americas. Canadians have had a long and close business link to Latin America and to the Caribbean nations. Atlantic Canadians have been exporting fish and timber, particularly to Caribbean countries, and importing fruit and spice and, as Rick alluded to, rum for well over a century. In fact, just a short anecdote, one of our fathers of Confederation, Joe Howe, who came from Nova Scotia, was rumored to have been partaking in the rum and woke up the day after the Charlottetown conference and said, "I signed what?" Some might say that rum is still holding us back in Atlantic Canada. Maintenant, l'Amérique latine se transforme. Elle devrait plus prospère, plus compétitive et plus novatrice, et même plus audacieuse sur certains aspects, où le Canada doit participer à ces processus de changement. La communauté des Caraïbes change elle aussi. Le Canada continue de contribuer, étant que partenaire à divers projets de développement axés sur l'éducation et l'aide partout dans cette région. Ils attendent élargir ce partenariat. These communities have contributed significantly. Communities that very much want to be more active, more present in Canada as well. They want to contribute to Canada's social and economic growth. And the diversity of the Caribbean mirrors that of Canada's largest and most productive communities. As the institutions of the Caribbean strengthen and the roles of the Commonwealth nations and the francophonie continue to grow, The freedom of association we share with these countries ensures that economic opportunities will also be there for us. Today, whether it's in mining, power generation, education, financial institutions and services like RICS, oil and gas, or telecommunications, Canadians and Canadian companies are there to invest in growing economies. In fact, Canada has now become the second largest investor in Latin America, surpassing Spain. And it may surprise some of you to know that the accumulated stock of $96 billion exceeds Canada's investments in Asia. In Guatemala, the Canadian company Goldcorp, a leading gold producer in the Americas, has become the single largest taxpayer in that country. And in some South American countries, Canada is among the top investors. The benefits are mutual. We are also seeking investors from the region to focus on the opportunities that Canada offers. Economic growth in the Americas is accelerating. Canada's trade within the region last year grew by over 20%. This not only benefits Canadians, but it yields important employment opportunities and technological transfers for local populations and Canadian companies. Canadian companies, as good corporate citizens, are paying local taxes and fees and also stepping up their social and environmental commitments where they invest and operate. And despite these substantial benefits, there are important challenges confronting our commercial relations with the Americas and our effort to grow the hemispheric economic prosperity. One challenge is that our commercial relations remain a fraction of the massive potential. The potential of a young demographic, of a growing middle class, of a rising GDP, of abundant natural resources, of new and exciting technologies. We must now demonstrate ambition. We will act on this potential. And for this reason, our government's economic plan, Advantage Canada, and Budget 2007, unveiled by Minister Flaherty, together make it clear that Canada's prosperity depends on our ability to trade and invest in this rapidly changing global economy. And Latin America presents us, all of you, with significant and growing markets for Canada to do business. And we are committed to improved transportation and communication links. Greater trade liberalization, regional economic integration is required by nearly all of our friends and requested. Neighbors, contacts throughout the Americas want more Canada, which is why we have invested so heavily in our gateway concepts. Strengthening more profitable exchanges within the hemisphere is critical. So we will build Pacific and Atlantic gateways and trade corridors for Canada and for the Americas. I note that $2.3 billion over the next 7 years has been earmarked to support investments in national priorities such as gateways, roads, highways, infrastructure, and other transportation facilities. And we are thrilled with how our Atlantic ports and transportation corridors can be best positioned to capture a larger share of that growing world trade. This is a question our government is answering. We believe that our growing expertise and competitive advantage in freight and container trade can translate into enormous opportunities for increased prosperity and transformative economic benefits for Atlantic Canada and all Canadians. Canadians have benefited substantially from the FTA and from NAFTA, and such arrangements as the Canada-Chile Free Trade Agreement. We also are working hard to conclude free trade agreements with Central American four of El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And there are plans to launch free trade negotiations with Dominican Republic, Peru, Colombia, and others in the Caribbean community. Another challenge is, of course, competitiveness. The competitiveness of the Americas remains relatively low. In 2006-2007, Global Competitive Index features only 3 countries from the Americas in its top 50 list: the United States of America, Canada, and Chile. So we are working to address the hemispheric's competitiveness gap in several ways. To ensure that Canadian businesses can continue to compete, our global commerce strategy is being led by our International Trade Minister, David Emerson. In addition to free trade agreements, we'll be promoting closer and specific commercial ties of the Americas in the areas of science, technology, investment, and air services. So to be clear, competitiveness is not only about firms. Competitiveness is about the environments in which businesses operate. Competitiveness is about solid legal and financial institutions, healthy and educated populations, and freely functioning and responsive societies. This is what we mean by saying that this government stands for freedom, democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights. These are not just academic terms. They are the required underpinnings of a successful, stable society and a successful political and economic relationship between sovereign nations. And they are required to ensure that the contract can be counted upon to deliver what parties have agreed to. And they are required to ensure that governments are responsive to their people, and required so that people have the opportunity to reach their full potential. Competitiveness flourishes in free and democratic societies, governed by the rule of law and respect for the human rights of their populace. That is what Canada wants, and that is what the Americas need more of. Canada was ranked the most democratic country in the Americas by the Economist Intelligence Unit. And Canada and Canadians for over 140 years built institutions like the Scotiabank that have allowed our difficulties and disagreements to be identified and successfully addressed. L'Amérique latine a parcouru une longue chemin avant d'aboutir aux diverses formes de démocratie qu'elle connaît aujourd'hui. D'abord territoire de sociétés autochtones dynamiques, elle a connu le colonialisme et la dictature, et tout au long de ce parcours, les latino-américains ont lutté pour la liberté et la démocratie. Leur quête n'est pas terminée, et nous sommes résolus à faire en sorte qu'ils la mènent à terme. Clearly, Canada opposes dictatorships. Canada supports democracies. This hemisphere will be bound together by the closest of fraternal ties in opposing injustice. We will support democracies that work in the interests of the people and promote duly elected Congresses through fair and transparent processes, independent courts, and fair constitutions. Canada supports real leaders and real builders in the Americas. Some think that they are creating political capital by creating hostility against foreign investment. This is impractical and unrealistic, and people throughout the hemisphere know it to be folly and unhelpful in trying to raise the standard of living in this important region. Real progress is possible for Canada and our partners in the Western Hemisphere if alliances for increasing freedom and democracy are sought and pursued relentlessly. Canada is ready to bring its resources and its goodwill to bear in that pursuit. We are ready to share our expertise with others in the public and the broader public sectors. There is a need for the private sector to reach out as well. And that's where you come in. We can learn from one another on how to build a more secure and more prosperous hemisphere. The past 25 years have seen significant change towards democracy in Latin America. Today, democracy has become a powerful aspiration everywhere. And the last 2 years alone have seen an unprecedented number of elections in the region, including in Brazil, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Ghana, and Venezuela. In some cases, such as Haiti and Ecuador, we saw the restoration of electoral power after a period of upheaval and uncertainty. In all cases, the accompanying role of the Organization of American States was a welcome factor in ensuring stability, confidence, and transparency in that process. But democracy is, of course, about much more than elections. It's about free and open societies and effective, transparent, accountable institutions. It's about political voice, freedom of association, and voluntary participation. We have an inspiring example of this kind of solidarity in our hemisphere, in our collective efforts working with partners in support of the people of Haiti. La situation en Haïti est d'importance cruciale. Après les élections l'année dernière, il y a eu la base de réelle amélioration, surtout dans le domaine de la sécurité, mais également au plan de la gestion macroéconomique et financière. Le Canada contribue à transformer véritablement cette société. Mais Haïti a beaucoup à faire pour renforcer ses institutions, ainsi que pour relancer son économie et la société. Ce pays est le plus important bénéficiaire de l'aide canadienne dans les Amériques et ne devancez pas devancés que par l'Afghanistan, au chapitre nos engagements mondiaux. Nous y investissons car nous savons que les Haïtiens doivent assister à une réforme tangible à la gouvernance de la police et de l'appareil judiciaire si on veut que leur pays échappe au cycle d'établissement de la violence et de la pauvreté. I recently met with the Brazilian foreign minister in Ottawa as a follow-up to my visit to Brasilia in February, as you mentioned, Noella. And we discussed ways that we could work together, our joint efforts to strengthen the support for the Haitian people, working through civil society, through academia and democratic institutions. I'm proud to say that Canada has been working side by side with countries like Brazil and 9 other countries from South and Central Americas. We are contributing troops, and 3, including Canada, which have been providing police. This is regional cooperation on an unprecedented scale in support of a member of our hemispheric country that has struggled for decades. Mexico is another country seemingly prepared to also enter into a partnership with Canada to do more for Haiti. It's this kind of cooperation that Canada will develop with countries throughout the Americas, partnerships aimed at addressing the challenges that we face collectively as a region. We are also pursuing democracy promotion at the OAS, and as I mentioned, next week I'll be attending the annual OAS General Assembly in Panama City. And I'll carry on with this effort and call upon my counterparts to pledge renewed support in promoting and defending democracy, electoral observation missions, crisis prevention, and conflict resolution efforts. Democracy and the rule of law are critical for development, but so too is addressing the security challenges that face the region. From drugs and crime to pandemics and natural disasters, no country is immune to the problems that flow across borders. Drug trafficking, transnational organized crime, youth gangs, illegal migration, refugee flows, infectious diseases, and natural disasters. These problems affect us all, and we must work together to address them. Canada is working with the OAS and with countries directly to improve their ability to provide security to their citizens. Again, in Haiti, our CMP officers are coaching and mentoring the Haitian National Police to help stabilize the region. We are also working with local communities to increase security. For example, we are investing $5 million in community security programs to bring local community groups, the mayor, and the Haitian National Police together in Cité Soleil to find solutions, local solutions for increased security there. And these measures contribute directly to the security on our own streets here at home, particularly in large urban centers like Toronto and Montreal. We have a common interest in addressing trans-border risks from narcotics, human trafficking, pandemics, and natural disaster. Finally, recognizing the particular fragility of the region in respect to natural disasters, Canada contributed recently $20 million to the Catastrophic Risk Facility of the World Bank to help countries in that region prevent and mitigate the impact of natural disasters. And we are working with North American partners to see if this can be extended to cover Central America, an area that is, of course, also plagued with hurricanes and seismic activity. In conclusion, in Panama at the OAS Assembly next week, I will be putting forward Canada's unequivocal support for democracies. I'll do so forcefully, in as articulate a way as possible, without offending. But our long-term aims are to develop real and sustainable relationships with our hemispheric partners. We can do no less. Our staples for the 18th and 19th centuries, fish, timber, raw materials, rum, are still very important to all of us. But our chief aims and objectives, indeed staples in the 21st century, are freedom, democracy, principles of human rights, and the rule of law. These are the staples to building secure, prosperous, and long-lasting productive partnerships. The efforts to build success, every step of the journey, are worth taking. The Americas can be more than the sum of our individual parts. As a good neighbor, Canada and Canadians are committed to helping shape a better future for all. And before I go, please join me in acknowledging the important role that is being played by Canadian men and women who are helping us to share our values with the world. the diplomats, the aid workers, the volunteers, and the soldiers in places like Afghanistan. I invite you to raise your glasses and have a toast to Canada and Canadians, making better and safer places around the world. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Well, now that you have 20 seconds to catch your breath, there's a couple of questions. We have time just for one or two. Where do you see the best opportunities in the Americas in the short term, as far as Canada is concerned?
Well, without voicing undue prejudice to any one country, I think it's sometimes sector-specific. When it comes to financial investments, I think most businesses, most institutions would agree that they look very much at the stability of the country itself. They look to the legal system to ensure that there will be protections afforded. Without excluding any countries, I would highlight a place like Peru, for example. I applaud the efforts that have been made in Colombia. They still need more support. We have fragile democracies in the Americas, and we have competing spheres of influence that we have to be cognizant of. Brazil is an emerging powerhouse in the Americas, undoubtedly, and they have been the beneficiaries now of a lengthy period of democracy. I think President Lula has done a great deal of work to foster a much more inviting atmosphere for business interests there, and we have significant Canadian ties to Brazil. And of course, Mexico, as part of the North American partnership, is again a country that we need to continue to foster and nurture those good trade relations. And the Caribbean, undeniably, offers enormous potential. So throughout that entire sphere of nations that make up the Americas, and I think it was very forward-looking, if I could say so, for Canada to enter the OAS in 1990, we can do wonderful things, also not just promoting our own business interests there, but reciprocating in inviting these countries to do more business here in Canada and invest here as well.
Thank you, Minister. Now, a nice short question. Do you plan on visiting Cuba anytime soon? And if so, when?
I'm going to send Rick there first. I'm not ruling it out, put it that way. We've had members of the Foreign Affairs Department go to Cuba recently. We've had a presence there. Obviously, we've never severed diplomatic ties with the Cubans. And in fact, our influence there is substantial. And so for that reason, we have taken an approach that clearly allows us to voice our concerns about human rights issues, but at the same time continue to foster economic activity, continue to show support in many areas. And for that reason, there is always potential for diplomatic trips to Cuba, but we have to, because of time constraints, rank some of the areas where we feel we can be perhaps more effective in the shorter term.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's all the time we have for questions, unfortunately, today. Thank you. Thanks, Minister, for being such a good sport and taking questions. It's not often that we get politicians taking questions at our podium. And now I would like to call on Jamie Watt to thank the Minister on our behalf. Jamie.
Minister, does that ever sound terrific to be able to call you Minister? On behalf of all of us, thank you for taking time out of a over-programmed and busy life to be here with us and for the remarks that you shared. But I think more importantly, we'd like to thank you for leading a foreign policy that has been characterized by courage and clarity. Whether it's your position on Hamas, on Turkey and the Armenian genocide, on many other files, you've been proactive and principled. When Prime Minister Harper first visited our troops in Afghanistan, he promised that his government would provide leadership on global issues, that we'd step up to the plate and do good where good is required. maintain that Canadian tradition, that Canadian way, as the minister said, to ensure that Canada counts. And I think you've done that every day you've been the Minister of Foreign Affairs. You know, ladies and gentlemen, for many, politics is a game. But for Minister MacKay, public life is a vocation. It's a noble calling. It's a chance to change the world for the better. And every day when Peter MacKay goes to work, he does that. And for that, you have our appreciation and gratitude today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you again to Minister MacKay for being with us today. Thank you all for coming today. This meeting is now adjourned.